Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things CEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. I am your host, Ryan.
And I am your host, TK, and today we are going to be talking about our favorite CEDH decks, but not before we talk about our favorite sponsors. Our merchandise is available in our stores today. We have dice, coins, playmats, tokens, sleeves, all of the alike. Go to playingwithpowermtg.com and help support the channel. Get your favorite nerd in your life something to play with in the new year. You can also support us on Patreon. Patrons get access to all sorts of things, including our Discord, webcam league, play days, early access to videos, names in the credits of our shows, exclusive videos, merchandise, and the chance to be in our shows. So please go to patreon.com/playingwithpowermtg and help support the show. And if you're looking to sponsor the podcast, please reach out in the email below. And as always, we do a Patreon shout out every episode. And today's shout out goes to, it says TK's mom. Thank you, Mom.
She's given us so much, and she gives us just a little bit more. Thank you, TK's mom.
Thank you so much, Mom. I love you. And also, a great shout out to Audrey Sellers. Thank you so much for supporting the show, Audrey and Mother. Wow.
Yeah. But yes, thank you, Audrey and TK's mom. Thank you for all of your support.
That is super funny. But yeah, today we are going to be talking about our favorite CEDH decks, which is very exciting. This is a topic that I love. I just love chatting with you, Ryan. I'm going to be honest with you. I'll be coming up with these episodes. I'm like, I just want to talk. I just want to talk with Ryan. What's going on? And so, yeah, today we're going to take a trip down memory lane for each other and kind of figure out what's our favorite CEDH decks. And there's a lot of ways we can tackle this, but I thought a great way to tackle this was talking about the first CEDH deck. I think that's a story for you and I that we both know like very well, but maybe people, who have just like tuned in, to these recent episodes that we've done maybe don't know. So I just wanted to give you the chance to talk about your first CEDH deck. I know it, but, tell the audience kind of how that started, what was that like and how that evolved.
Yeah, and one of the things we also want to talk about tonight is kind of where these different cues and stuff kind of come full circle around and what kind of helps drive people into the styles that they see today from a player perspective or a CEDH journey that you might take. We're going to talk about our personal accounts, and definitely we're going to be gushing over our favorite CEDH decks tonight. But how did that shape us? And taking some of these cues, how does it shape you? Because there were some things that I learned along the way that helped me make future deck choices or made me realize in certain areas that might even have nerfed me a little bit in some places where I could have stood to have grown a little bit. And so not only are we going to be just talking about our favorite CEDH decks today, but we're also going to talk about a couple of lessons and stuff like that derive from, this journey that we took in all of these different CEDH decks we had.
Absolutely. Class is in session and you guys are screwed because I'm the worst teacher. But we're here. Hope you crammed.
This will be on the final, everyone.
Absolutely. But yeah, you wanna kick us off, talk about your first CH deck and how that went?
Sure. So those of you who do know me and the channel for a long time will have no surprise as to what this particular CEDH deck is. But for those of you who are maybe newer to the channel or maybe newer to the podcast, who don't necessarily know who I am and what my favorite CEDH deck is, basically my very first CEDH deck was Godo Bandit Warlord. That is, to this day, my favorite CEDH deck. And that's not, there's sentiment that usually happens when you have your first CEDH deck, the deck that gets you into the format and lets you fall in love with it. But it doesn't always translate into the deck that you use to this very day. A lot of people grow out of certain things, maybe because they entered for budget reasons, or maybe they entered for, this is an accessibility thing. Somebody let me borrow this deck or something like that. Or maybe, we printed up some proxies and I just fell in love with this particular list. But then eventually they figure out where they wanted to go. But a lot of times your first selection is kind of where you want to gravitate towards. It has a certain play style that you might be in love with. And Godo Bandit Warlord was mine. I've kind of told the story many times before, and we'll put a link in the show notes and in the cards on YouTube and stuff like that of kind of where the story of playing with power came from. So we don't need to rehash that tonight. But the long short of it is that, the arms race of a typical high power casual EDH table led to CEDH, and Godo Bandit Warlord was the first one I had selected. Now, I selected Godo Bandit Warlord because it was mono red. I gravitated towards Godo because I am a mono red player at heart. Whenever I delve into any format or I look into anything else that's in the world of Magic, whether it be Commander, whether it be 60 card, no matter what it is, I always kind of steer towards the red color first. Not necessarily only just mono red only, but it is the first color that I look at when I'm making my deck selection. And Godo Bandit Warlord was kind of at the time, now, because this was a while back, this was 2018 that I was actually looking at the different decks that were available. And Godo Bandit Warlord was just getting its footing into the CDH realm in a way that actually catapulted it from like a tier 2 or tier 3, if we talk about tiers, up to an actual like formidable deck. There's a whole history of Godo. We once again won't go into that, but basically I was like, I'm a red player. I like to go fast. I like to be the threat at the table. I like to be the one you answer. I like everyone to say, okay, we're all sitting down, and they want you to look at my commander and say, he's the problem. That's basically my style. That's what I like to do. And Godo Bandit Warlord has always resonated with that style for all this time. And so that's my initial like gushing over Godo.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, this is a story that I've heard, before, and I know some people have too, but every time I hear it, I think like how different it is for, some people because a lot of people find that first deck and are like, that's actually not what I really wanted, and throw it away and then find their next thing. But for you, it was kind of like, actually, no, this is perfect. And I think that's really cool to have something kind of almost be like, what's the term that I'm looking for? Just like a match made in the stars. It's like, oh, great.
I was lucky is really what I was.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who, like you said, they started with a deck and that deck just wasn't it. They found out what they didn't like. You know what I mean? Like, I've seen people that start with Blood Pod, which is, Timnatana, and they were like, oh, I like stacks and I like slowing down the game. And it just really hard to resonate because there's such a learning curve and stuff like that. And so they have to kind of find out the hard way whether or not they do want to go stacks, but not that route, or if they just don't like stacks in this particular format or side of the format. And so that's just one path of many that got taken. I consider myself very lucky that I was actually able to choose a deck that resonated so well with me and that I fell in love with.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because now, there's so many different tools that people can look to. And when it comes to finding decks, you have CEDH.guide or the database or, our videos or anybody else's like channels.
EDH Top
videos.
16.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways people can go about like looking and doing the research to find it. But that stuff was not around like even like 2 years ago. Was not around until you really had to like, do word of mouth and really like figuring out, okay, is this what I want? Is this something that's cool? And so it's kind of crazy how much that side of like finding your identity, because that's something that I think is really understated in Commander, is the whole idea of people's identity being shown through a commander. And I think that's something that a lot of people, even in the casual sphere, love about Commander, is the fact that this deck tells you something about me. Whether it's I just like being, really big, strong boys because I play Gashaf, or it's, no, I like going wide. Something out like Elf Ball or something. There's always a story with everybody's Commander. And I think that still rings true into CDH. And I think that's really cool.
100%. I think that EDH Commander whatever, whether it be CDH or the casual side, your deck is a form of self-expression. Like you said, it tells you a story about who you are or what you like. And those who like to say, well, CDH doesn't do that as much, I tend to question that, because that is absolutely not true. I see people all the time play a certain style or certain variant of a certain play style. They might switch the face up commanders, but the approach and the strategy is still the same, which lends itself to this same premise that it is still a form of self-expression. I know there's tournament grinders and those people out there who like try and formulate the best decks and stuff like that. And sure, yeah, but what's leaning you into turbo? Because you think it's the best strategy? Maybe, but also, other people might think control's the best strategy and they might grind that. But, you still do kind of gravitate towards what you like. There's outliers, of course. There's exceptions to every rule. There's going to be people in the comments that say, that's absolutely not what we do. We do something else. That's fine. That's okay, too. But for the most part, Commander is a form of self-expression, and CDH is no different.
Absolutely. 100%. I know when we were talking earlier about kind of how your initial commander evolves over time in terms of your choice, like that's not always going to be the one-to-one translation. That's kind of closer to my story, because I know for me, and I think we've talked about this before, this is probably the first time that I've said it on camera, but the first deck that I played was Kess, Turbo Kess. And that was it was great.
It's such a good deck. It was so good.
Much fun. Yeah. And that was a deck so how I started actually this was about 2 years ago. And so the CEDH.guide was just getting started. Ken Bauman, who's shout out to Ken, he probably has no idea that this is actually how I started, but I started through him because he was starting the kind of work for that guide and was going on Twitter and was doing these live updates on like, okay, this is what the site is going to have now. This is what it's going to have now, and was asking for feedback. And so back at my LGS, back when I was in college, CDH night was the night to be at the store. It was Friday Night Magic, and then Thursdays were their like competitive pods. And you would have casual pods that were like, there was like 4 or 5 that were firing off. But then the other half of the store were people who have been playing for years and just had the resources and everything and were playing competitive Magic all the way through. And I was like, wow, I want to do that. And so I looked at resources online, found Ken Bauman's tweets, and the initial thing that got me like into it was the fact that it was proxy friendly. I've been playing Modern for years and years and years, and had been I was used to spending a ton of money on Magic. And so for someone to be like, oh, you actually could just print some stuff off and most people would be okay with it, I was like, oh, sign me up. I'm there.
Say less right now. You've got me.
You got me. And so I tweeted at Ken and asked, okay, well, what deck should I play? And we exchanged a couple tweets or whatever, and we got down to Kess. I was like, I love to chain spells. That's like, I love combo. I love chaining spells. I want to cast a lot of things in a very short amount of time. I want to play solitaire while everybody else looks at me. That's how I like to play Magic. And so he was like, yeah, Kess might be good. And I went to my local library. I printed it off. I was like, paid $6 because I wanted it in color. I printed it off, snipped it up, and sleeved them up.
Big spender.
Big spender, $6. Yeah. It's crazy too, because like compared to that, I also had like a full like Yawgmoth combo, like sleeved up and everything, and it's like the comparison's completely different.
The most expensive thing were your sleeves for your deck.
Exactly. And so I sleeved it up and everything, and I started playing on Spell Table, and I remember falling in love. I was like, wow, yeah, I'm sold on this format. I'm sold on this deck. I just wheeled like 3 different times and was able to win on turn 3. I love this. This is great. And seeing kind of the progression from then to there, because now I love Kess. It still holds a very special place in my heart as one of my favorite decks. Mm-hmm. But what I play now is very much. I'm very much similar to you in an aspect where I like to be the threat at the table. The feeling and rush that I get from doing a thing and everybody's like, ugh. Most people hate that. I love that. I want to sit down at a pod and have like Elden Ring boss music play. Like that's what I want. And so I gravitate towards like things like Kinnan, things like right now I'm playing Narset. We did the Overlooked Commanders, and I've been playing with Kai, and that's a very like Kai's list, and it's a very like similar feeling of like, oh, I'm unstoppable. That's what I like. I don't want to. I love combos, but I love dominating a board, and that's something that kind of came out of me just trying things out. And so while Kess is something that I enjoyed, it was really like my third deck that I'd say that really like enlightened me. Okay, this is what I want to play. This is kind of how I like to do things. So it's really interesting that you said that. Yeah.
That's awesome. I've played against Cass many times, especially in the early days. One of the original pods before Playing Powers got started, and some of the people in the very first episodes, way back in the day, early 2019. One of those players was named Don, and he had a Cass deck, and it was exactly that. He loved that Grixis pile of just always having an answer, always being able to chain the spells together, putting together this complex puzzle to find the win. And he loved that whole concept, and he used Cass. And what's interesting about that is that a lot of times that journey will follow its way up from high power casual into CEDH. And he did the same thing. He had a high power casual deck of Cass. It didn't have like the CEDH style win cons, but it had a lot of the other stuff. And it was definitely about that play style. And we just kind of took it to the CEDH level when we finally started playing CEDH. And it's really, really interesting that you said, hey, I like chaining these spells together. I like being the threat at the table. I like being the person that says, okay, we need to deal with this person here. So make sure you're mulliganing for the interaction for that specifically, and I think that's super cool to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's for me specifically, I know if I don't want to do anything that feels fair. And that sounds so crazy to say out loud, but truly, like if I'm building a pile now, I want the synergy of the deck and everything to flow into a point where it almost feels like I'm cheating, but I'm not. I want people to look around at the deck and be like, there's no way it does that. I'm like, yeah, it does. And I'm just going to do it. And that's going to suck for everybody else. But I'm just going to keep doing it. And so that's something that I found out through just playing, just casually, like from that high power going into, okay, cool, we're going to play with the best of the best. That's what I found out. Because beforehand, I think, I was way more of a like Timmy player, I guess is the term, of just like, I want big spells, big creatures, and I want to swing. Yeah. And a lot of times in like 60 card, I was gravitating towards aggro strategies that did that before I got to like Yawgmoth combo. And then I like went up into, the CEDH realm. And I was like, no, I do like these like chaining of spells and this kind of puzzle thing. That's really cool. And something that I probably would never have thought had I not had the space to play around with list because of the whole proxy friendly thing, but also too is like other people helping me out and kind of seeing what was going on. So yeah, it's really cool.
I think that is really cool. And it's neat to kind of see how these paths and progress and stuff like that, which leads me into maybe our next point or my next question. Cass was your first love that got you into CEDH. You said, this is for me. I'm sold. I'm a believer. Cass is not really in so much considered the in-meta choice anymore, since so much has evolved in the course of the time since Cass was considered what we call quote-unquote viable. I'm using a lot of asterisks and I'm using a lot of quotes here because this is still very a subjective realm. But Cass has fallen out of favor. So talk to me and talk to us about how you feel about Kess now with so many Grixis partners out there. And, is this something you still stick with? Is this something you moved on from? Talk to me a little bit about that whole journey.
Yeah, 100%. I think so. Personally, Kess is I still have all of the cards. Like that first list, I bought a lot of those cards in paper, and I have them, throughout these years, and it's around. It's in my binder and stuff like that, or in other decks, but it's there. I don't play it as much because of that thing of like it's fallen out of favor, as well as I'm getting more into tournament grinding, so I have to think about viability outside of just, do I want to have as much fun? I still have fun, but I also want to win. I'm paying like $30 to enter these things. I'm not trying to just sit around and shuffle spells.
What are you trying to say?
Whoa.
Wait a second.
Godo can win. I'm not saying anything about it. I'm just saying that Kess for me.
I was about to say, podcast over. Thanks. Tune in. Make sure to give us a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever, and Spotify.
Next week, they're going to look up and it's like, oh yeah, Zeb and Ryan are hosting.
Yeah, Ryan and any random guest, not TK. Welcome, not God. TK, to the show. I'll tell you who's not the patron shout out, not TK's mom. That's for sure.
Yeah, no. So I have fallen away from like playing Kess as much, but if I am teaching other people how to play, and that's come up a lot, and they are wanting to play into the turbo meta of like Grixis and everything, I still think Kess is an amazing tool to teach people how to play that Grixis shell. Because I often liken it to, it's the Grixis shell, but a little bit of like a leeway because of Kess's ability, to where there is kind of this, okay, get Kess on the board, then do your Grixis stuff. And now if you try to combo and it doesn't work, don't worry, you can do it again. And so it allows to really like teach people, okay, proper window timing, because it's like, oh, that didn't work initially, but don't worry, you can still do that without being so much as punished as you would if you play, I don't know, Roxai, for your first time, or, other Grixis shells that are less forgiving. For that reason. So those times I will still pick it up and be like, hey, like, yeah, let me teach you kind of the ways to go about this and everything else. But as far as my personal playment with it, that's kind of where it stops, just because of, the amount of time that I have to actually play the format and everything these days. I'm either playing for tournaments, I'm playing for content, or if I'm playing with my friends, it's to practice for the next event or anything else too. And so it tends to not come up as often, but it's still, every time I do sleeve it up to, help somebody else out or anything else, it's still some of the most fun that I have.
That's such an interesting concept. I actually love that, because kind of in a way what you're saying is that Kess is Grixis with training wheels in a way. You're saying, hey, this allows you to stumble a little bit more because you have Kess's ability, and you don't have to make the decision trees of partners or have somebody have to explain to you, well, Silas Rin is technically there for the colors, and not all people coming from casual to CDH are always able to grok that super easily. They're like, wait, so you never cast Silas? You're like, well, let me tell you about these super niche cases, and their eyes are just glazing over because you're like, yeah, sometimes you cast it. But Kess doesn't have that problem. Kess has got the ability stapled right onto it, and it's in the proper color, so you don't have to worry about the things that you do with timing in regards to some of the other Grixis partner pairs. So like the idea of it being Grixis with training wheels is a really cool concept. I really like that a lot. And I will probably start recommending Kess to people, even though it's not a, what would be considered the modern Grixis shell, or the modern Grixis commander, sorry. Because it's a really good way to get into Grixis and CDH without having to worry about the intricacies of partner pairings. I like that a lot.
Absolutely. I appreciate. Yeah, it's been something that I've been using for a minute, just because I've always made that recognition of like, oh, Kess's ability is something you can kind of lean on here, and because I can't tell you how many times I was trying to teach my buddies like, oh yeah, how to play Turbo, and we're playing Roxai, and they're like, oh, I'm gonna cast Silas, and then I'm gonna swing, and I'm like, why are you doing that? And they're like, oh, because I've got this Lotus Petal in the graveyard.
I have 3 men open. I have a Jewel Lotus. You're like, no.
No,
but
baby,
you can't
no.
blame them for having that line of reasoning. You know what I mean? You can't blame them for that because it's in the command zone. And I understand. And that's what I mean. It's one of those things you're like, a lot of commander players who are moving into CDH that, you know, are trying to make heads or tails of these types of board states aren't always going to understand from the get-go that intricacy, and they'll learn it eventually. But you don't start with, you don't start with algebra when you still need to learn the ABCs. You need to step into it. And then when it comes time to get to the more advanced levels and stuff like that, it'll make perfect sense. But you just have to get your feet wet first. And I think Kess is a really cool way to do that. I love that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there's going to be some people who are in the comments who are like, well, you can just start out. You gotta go headstrong. That's how I learned it. And it's like, sure, you probably lost those first 20 games too. And that sucks. But hey, that's everybody's different. Everybody reacts to things differently. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not to say that this is the one size fits all for everything, because nothing in Magic is like that across anything ever. There are people that hate Commander entirely and only play 60 card. Like, we're not saying that this is the only way to get in. We're saying that this is an interesting way for those who do love Turbo to not be overwhelmed so quickly with all the intricacies that goes into a deep deck like a Rogsai or something to that effect. You can start with Kess, get a feel for the format with that, like I said, with the training wheels, with being able to use Kess's ability, and there's just one commander to cast, and be able to then move to, once you get that information and you start to internalize it, then you can move on to like the Rogsais. And a lot of times you'll probably be able to move on to the Rogsais by just switching Kess for Rogsai.
Yeah.
Like you probably can just do that. You'll probably just switch 2 cards and you're good to go. And because it's time for you to, quote unquote, take the training wheels off.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that switch will probably be a lot easier because you've already learned the, building blocks of everything, and you don't have to understand, okay, cool, I cast Rog and now I do Paradise Mantle. Okay, where's the line here? Versus like there's a lot more intricacies for that. And so that's kind of the role that Kess has evolved for in my space now, is kind of being that it was my first deck. If people want to learn Turbo, then I kind of push them towards that for those reasons as well.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Card Conduit. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I've used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them to get the best value of my extra cards. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have 3 main services. Their standard service lets you send them unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best buy list price for your cards. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half of the fee of the standard service and charge no fee per card. Their new sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. They give you the best price for your cards. They work with competitive buy listing partners, including ones not open to the public. Users get an average of 19% more for their collection than they would have from a major retail buy list, even with Card Conduit's fees. Card Conduit also optimizes buy listing for card condition as well. Since vendors have different penalties for wear and tear, Card Conduit will find the best buy list price against the specific condition of a card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the show notes or the description, or use the promo code POWER, you'll also get 10% off their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's podcast.
I was gonna ask. I was gonna flip it on you actually in terms of a question, because now that has me thinking. With you having played Godo for your time in this format. How has the deck evolved in your time, noticeably, and where is it from where it started then to like now? How has that transition been?
Godo taught me a whole lot. And it also it taught me a whole lot about CEDH. And it wasn't just because it was all the intricacies of Godo. Godo allowed me to sit at a table and understand on a lot deeper level than I think some of the other starting CDH decks would have done. Because when you're the threat at the table that needs to be answered, when you're the glass cannon that is easily disrupted, when you're the person who just says, herder, I'm going to count to 11 and win the game, and that is how you start because it's real easy to understand, especially in a complex format like this, you're going to learn a lot of lessons. Notice I didn't say you're going to make a lot of mistakes because if you don't learn from this, it is a mistake. It's when you do learn that it becomes a lesson. And I learned a ton of lessons on Godo. My journey through CEDH came from always sitting down at the table and being like, okay, I've mulled to a Swords of Plowshares. Let's play the game now so I can stop Godo turn 1, 2, or 3. And I had to learn CEDH from the perspective of being able to push through so many things. It helped me learn threat assessment, when to go for it, when to hold back, what the cards that were worth countering were, because I saw many times at the table, someone would let something through and I'm like, that's the wrong thing to let through for me. You should not have let that through. And whereas before it was just like, yep, I'm at 7 mana. Now I'm at 9 mana. Oh, one more turn. I'm at 11 mana because that is how I started. But as I progressed along, there's a number of things that I learned by sticking to this deck that not everyone was able probably to do when they started with a deck and then moved on to something else. And this isn't just a lesson you learn when you're starting. It's a lesson that you learn when you're just going deep on any CDH deck. And that's really a good takeaway, is that the more you play it, the better you'll understand where things lie in your roles at the table. Not only, hey, just a basic understanding of every card in your deck. I can't tell you the amount of times people have tutored and be like, did I put that card in there? Is that card? Let me search for this answer. Maybe this will be an answer for me. That happens all the time. It's because they don't play the deck a whole lot. They don't go really, really deep on that particular deck. Well, I've been playing this deck for 4+ years. I have a really good understanding of what I can do and what I can't do at a table. And it allowed me to understand a lot of things that other people don't at first glance. Everyone sees Godo as a count to 11 and win the game deck. Godo can do so much more than that, but you don't know that because that is your heuristic when you identify what Godo is and what Godo's role is at the table. That's what you internalize and say, okay, I know what I need to do there, and then I need to formulate my game plan. I had to do the same thing, but I had to do it in mono red. And when you're in a monocolor or a restrictive color, let's say you're in Gruul or let's say you're in Azorius or something like that, you have to learn Magic in a way that's different than a lot of other players. Because when you learn these things from a restrictive color, it breeds creativity. It breeds being able to better threat assess certain things. I only have 2 counter spells in my whole deck, maybe 3. I don't have the ability to counter everything. So you have to understand when you should counter something to save a table, when you should just hold up the counter to, try and protect your win. It helps you become better at assessing those things. And having that and going so deep on that for so long, that when I finally did branch out into other things, I found myself at a really good position to be able to pick it up very quickly. When I started to play in the worlds of blue and stuff like that, and people who have known the channel for a long time know I don't hardly ever play blue. And when I do play blue, I hardly ever counter anything. Unless it's like a win attempt on the stack. I'll be like, I don't care what it is. It resolves, whatever. Oh, you want to draw 9 cards? It resolves, whatever it is. Oh, you want to do this? It resolves. Unless it's literally like game over, winning right here, I never counter it because I've learned because of being on the opposite side of it, learning from Godo, I've learned what is and is not truly important to winning the game.
Yeah, 100%. And while you were saying that too, I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy, because on the flip side, as someone who, Kess was my first deck, but it wasn't necessarily what it doesn't translate to the playstyle that I play now as much. And those are lessons in terms of like accurate threat assessment and like knowing window theory, like essentially when to go for the win and things of that nature that I didn't learn until like, we're talking like years in, essentially. Like those are things that I can feel myself now having. I could say I'm pretty good at, doing mid game, but had you asked me, or put me in situations, I would say even as far back as 6 months ago, on like being able to accurately threat assess certain pods, even pods, like a lot of people put threat assessment onto the idea of, oh, I know what this deck is because it's one of the top decks in the format, so I can accurately know what to play. Okay, cool, but that's not going to be every pod. Threat assessment to me is being able to do that against, I don't know, Yannette, Kess, and Animard. Like, do you know how to play against those? You don't see those all the time. And so those are skills that, like, to your point, you were able to pick up on a lot faster than probably most people, because you were able to stick with this deck and really understand like the intricacies of it. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't do. Just like, it's just not the case. If a deck doesn't really click that first time for a lot of people, I know this because I am that person. It's like, okay, cool, putting it apart. These are the staples. Let's build something else.
Just throw this out. This will totally get in my very organized pile on my desk for 3 years.
Exactly. And move
Ask
it,
me how I know.
You'll find it later, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember this. That's cool. I didn't even know I had a copy of this. And so
oh man, I've got 3. Oh, it's because I bought it twice because I lost it. Yeah.
The amount of times I have went to like Card Kingdom or TCG Player and bought a card that I know I've had like a full playset of. I just don't want to look for it. It's insane.
Yep. A lot of us are guilty of that. That is for sure.
But yeah, to your point, that's something that you were able to learn. And I know that that's something that for me and other players who are like me, who just are like, I'm just going to jump from deck to deck because this isn't working, without really putting in the time and the effort and the reps into a deck to really learn it. That's really awesome. That's awesome that you were able to get that, for sure.
Yeah, I think I was fortunate. Like I said, I was lucky to have stuck with Godo as long as I did. And we're not saying that jumping around on different decks is a bad thing by any stretch. We know that that's what a lot of people who like Commander's flavor is. They love brewing. They always love experimenting. They love trying new things. It's fresh. It's new. It's fun new experiences and stuff. And we're not saying there's anything wrong with that. But we're also saying is we challenge you to also have one that you're going to go deep on, because you will find a level of enjoyment that you did not find when you jump around from deck to deck. Not saying stop jumping. I'm saying also, as well as jumping, try and say, this is a deck that I want to go deep on. I want to know every line of everything down to like what the flavor text is on these things. And I want to know in every situation, how will this card in my hand interact with what's going on? And having that deep level of understanding, I would say, is kind of like you said earlier, it feels like cheating. Like, you see all these different circumstances where you're just like, you can almost like X-ray vision the table because of the knowledge of your deck. You can almost see X-ray vision of what cards are left in your library, what interactions are working with the cards on your battlefield, and being able to just understand that thing because you are so well versed with this deck feels so satisfying. It is so much fun to do that. When I broke through the count to 11 barrier in Godo, I had fun with it up until that point, but I fell in love with it and became obsessed with it when I broke through into that part of it. And if you have not done that with a deck yet, I highly encourage you to at least give it a shot. It is worth it, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And you see the difference, not just when you as a pilot, but you'll see it with other people as well. When I play against, for example, when I play against Higher, when I play against Alex and he's playing Kinnan versus other decks, you can tell he knows every single card. He knows every single line. There is not ever a point where he is sweating over anything. Especially in pods where there's other decks that he may not be as knowledgeable about. It doesn't matter. He knows and trusts his build to a point where, okay, you're playing that and that's stacking me out in this way. Okay, cool. Think about it for a second. Okay, cool. I know exactly how to get out of this. And that's something that comes with reps. And that's something that you can tell from a lot of players, who have really taken the time. And so that's really great that you were able to get that out of Godo for sure.
Mm-hmm. So I think a good question to ask is kind of piggybacking off of that. When do you think it might be time to say, new deck, I loved you, it's been great, but it's time to move on to the next thing? You have this experience because you had Kess and you loved Kess. You got into CDH because of Kess, but then eventually you said it's time to move on, from Kess into other things. Tell me, at what point did you, and maybe tell the other people for ways to look out for this, when did you think it was probably time to say, I appreciate you, I've maybe outgrown you, it's time to move on? What were some things that indicated that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with Kess specifically, it was kind of twofold, because there was the competitive aspect of it, of me trying to go to tournaments and not getting the results I wanted. That almost was like an external cue of like, okay, maybe it's time I switch something up. Maybe I update this more. Maybe I, switch the face commander and try the shell in a different variant. That tells you, and a lot of times that's a lot easier to have. It's the world telling you, all right, buddy, it's time to pack this up. That's, that's different. But there's also, I think it comes down to, this is still a format in which you are spending your time, your money, your everything into. So I think it comes down to, for me, are you still having fun? And is it that same fun, and I know that probably is hard to gauge for some people, but when you're sleeving up a deck, or you're sitting at a pod and you're like, okay, cool, we got this person's on this person's on this person's on this, and I'm here with, for example, Kess. Am I excited? Do I want to play this game? Do I want to see, what my mulligans are? Am I excited to see that? Or am I dreading it because I already know it's about to be a slog? Am I dreading it because I know I'm not going to have fun? And I think I very much have that sense now of when I'm getting tired of a build, not just because of, oh, I'm getting tired of it because I've played it so much on the channel, or I'm getting tired of it because I am, playing so much of it with my friends, because that doesn't necessarily mean it's not fun to me, just because it's not shiny and new. What dictates not being fun to me is my level of excitement to shuffle it up, whether or not there is a satisfaction from winning with it or doing certain lines. Because you can see the light die in somebody's eyes when they're not having fun with the deck, and they might be winning, and they're comboing off. They're like, yeah, and I'll cast Breach, and yeah, I'll recast into a
yeah, Breach, cool. Good, we good, and then everyone's like, yeah, okay, sure, yeah,
exactly. And it's like, cool, yeah, you got the results, but like, is it pushing you? Is it making you want to be a better player? And are you having, are you enjoying yourself? Because if I'm not enjoying myself playing this stuff, I don't care if it's for content. I don't care if it's in a tournament. I don't care what facet of it is. I'm not doing it. I don't have to. I mean, I have to. I'm employed, but I don't have to. I do have to, but I don't have to sit there and play this deck specifically. Ryan is not sitting over our shoulders and telling us, have to play Nimbus. Like, no, I chose to do that. That's something that I wanted to do. Like,
nice cover. Thanks, TK. Appreciate
absolutely,
that. It's exactly how we rehearsed it.
Everybody's in the comments like, no, there's no way. There's no way you would play Nimbus of choice. Yeah, like
who would choose to play Nimbus? That's right.
Exactly.
Sorry, all 3 Nimbus players out there. My bad.
Yeah, super sorry, Snake. I'm putting on for you. I apologize. But yeah. There's I think nobody has to force you to play that, and so if for some reason, for whatever reason maybe it's not exciting anymore, you just are not challenging yourself. I know I'm a person that is very much, if a deck is not pushing me to want to learn it better and or learn the meta in a way that interacts with that deck and push myself to be a better player, then I find myself being less fulfilled. And I think that's why I'm playing Kinnan right now, and I'm having so much fun with it, because it's one of those decks that, like you said, people respect. And so you sit down and you are automatically like, okay, we have to deal with Kinnan. And that is something that I enjoy and pushes me to be a better player, because if I sit down with a Kess deck now, most people are not going to respect that deck. If I sit down with a Yannette deck right now, people are not going to respect that deck. And so a lot of times your wins can come easy, because as long as you know what you're doing, everybody else is going to let stuff fly. But if I sit down with a Kinnan deck right now, it doesn't matter what is in that deck. It could be, all just goo goo gaga, different, like, a shell that nobody has ever tried before. People are so scared of that commander specifically that you are automatically the target. And now that puts pressure on me to figure out how to interact with things in ways that other commanders probably wouldn't. And that's what challenges me. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I really want to piggyback off of that, because I think it's also a really good point to bring up, is that when you do go deep on a deck, or when you do find your love that gets you into it, you'll find yourself starting to wane after a while. I experienced this with Godo. I was like, this just isn't the deck I want to bring out. It is a one-trick pony in what it does, like, it's one way to get there. A lot of Grixis shells, there's a lot of different paths to get to your conclusion, and you do a lot of game actions to do it, but like Godo doesn't do that. And so I found myself starting to get a little tired of it, a little bored of it. Be like, yeah, Godo, oh, it got stopped. Yeah, Godo, oh, it resolved. Yeah, Godo. And it was just the kind of the same thing. And a lot of times that leads people to go ahead and say it's time to move on from that. And there's a lot of circumstances when that is 100% the right thing to do. I've figured out who I was as a CEDH player. I realized that I do want to play it in this way, and that deck doesn't really do that. So I'm going to go ahead and pivot to over here. But there's other times when it's okay to just take a break from it. And going into what you said, when you kind of went really deep on a deck, you start to really become a master of it, and you kind of always want to push yourself and challenge yourself to do new things and try other stuff for variety, and just try and self-improvement in areas, whether or not you're tournament grinding. I did the same thing. I said, okay, Godo is good, I'm not going to take it apart, but I'm going to put it on the shelf for a bit, and I'm going to try Mad Farm. I'm going to try Timna Jeska. It's actually my second favorite deck, and we're not going to need to go into all the intricacies of that, but what it was like, okay, I really like those play styles. I really like doing all that stuff. And I really still like really having red be a heavy influence in what I'm doing here. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give this Timna Jeska deck a try. And I've had that spark and that love that I had when I originally started playing Godo. And I was like, oh, this is an amazing deck. I have such a great time with it. And I will play both of those decks throughout a common evening sitting down at the commander table. I don't just play one, or I don't just play the other. They both scratch different itches, and they both do each one very well. And so when the time had come, when I had played enough Mad Farm or Timna Jeska, I said, it's time to pick up Godo again and keep going with it. And I think that's also a very healthy thing to do. You briefly mentioned Nemris there, so I'm wondering if that might be what it is for you. But Timna Jeska was mine. And those are still the 2 decks that I keep intact to this very day. My third deck is usually a rotating deck. Right now it's like Yuriko, for example. But it's not always Yuriko. Sometimes it's other things. But Timna Jeska and Godo Bandit Warlord are kind of my two core decks that I always love. They both do different things, but they both still cater to my, fast, go quick play style of things, and they both do it in different ways, which is what I love. And that's what I do. So it's not just one deck forever, but I do currently run between the two different decks.
Absolutely. I love that you brought that up, because that's something that I think a lot of people fall into the trap of. It's like, oh, I just don't like this deck anymore, so I'm going to throw it away. And sometimes it's just as simple as go out and touch grass, buddy. You've been playing Magic, for
playing Godo for 2 years, buddy. Let's branch out a little.
You've been playing Magic for 27 hours out of the day. That's not even possible. How are you doing that? Maybe let's pause and take a break. And yeah, Nimrus was one of those things for me, because at the time I was still playing Grixis Cores. I was playing Roxai. And I remember when I found out about Nimrus, we were doing Mox Masters casting, and Snake had got to the end with it. I think that was, I want to say...
It was a number of months back, yes.
A number of months back. Yeah. And I remember going on the internet and talking with Memo and Cal, and I was like, dude, this is crazy. And that was like me falling with it too. Yannette is actually another deck that was that for me from Kess. I played Kess throughout, and I was like, it's not really kicking anymore. I don't know what to do. And so in my transition from turning Kess into Roxai, which is what happened with Kess for me, I went and took Kess apart. I put it on the shelf. I was like, okay, we'll go back to it at some point, and I'm going to play around with some other play styles while I figure out what I want to do with that. Because I had already bought most of the deck. I was like, okay, cool. I need these cards. I'm not just going to have them sit. I paid good money. We're going to do something with these.
Yeah. And especially in a Grixis core. That's exactly. A lot of money.
I was like, dude, I didn't pay all this money for these tutors for nothing.
Exactly.
And so I switched to Yannette, Cryptic Sovereign, which is a card that probably nobody is like, there's a lot of people who are like, but for just the timing purposes, it was Tivit before Tivit. Essentially,
that's a good way to put it, actually.
Yeah, same colors, same thing on combat damage trigger, and you get to flip the top, and if it's an odd CMC, you get to put it on the ground. And it did everything I wanted to do. I felt like a boss. I felt like a final boss when I'm sitting down. I'm dealing tons of damage, so it spoke to that Timmy side of me as well, because it's a big creature, it's a big sphinx, and I'm also cheating things into play. I flip ad nauseam. I'm still doing the ad nauseum thing. It was great. And I played Yannette forever. That's where I still have, like, most of my Esper core is still from that deck. I didn't buy anything different because I had the deck just on hand in different parts all the time. And that deck gave me a breath of fresh air of realizing, okay, what else do I like to play? As well as allowing me to go back, look at Kess, and be like, okay, this is how I'm going to evolve this. Switch to the Roxai, and those are the decks that I've been playing, essentially, outside of like the stuff that I've made for the channel and, my other brewing experiences and things for tournaments now. Those are the decks that I've got in paper here. And it's all because being able to take a step back and really realizing, okay, I have burnt out, I think is the best term, because I don't want to say tired, because the love is still there that you built. It's just that after a while, you get to a point where, you're in this motion. It's robotic. It's no longer feels human. You're not really going through it the same way that you are. And
I always call it's not a dance anymore. You're not dancing with your deck anymore. You're just kind of operating the deck.
Yeah, 100%. And so being able to know when it's time to take that pause and take that break is great. Another deck that I do that with is Yuriko. I have a $100 budget Yuriko deck that is CEDH that I bring out with me when people want to try out CEDH and they don't I don't feel comfortable giving them this $1,000 deck.
Only 1,000? That must be your budget deck. Only $1,000. Wow. Yeah.
Absolutely. Or, I just am like, oh, somebody else needs a deck. Here you go. Take this. And that's a deck that I switch around to a lot. And I switch between like 3 decks at a time. And those 3 decks are kind of what I try to train up on. And whenever I get tired of one, then I have another one. Instead of me hopping between lists and not growing with them, I'm able to at least have that space to really expand myself and not get burnt out so easily. So yeah, with that being said, then I guess it's cool to kind of point to the viewers, the listeners here. What are the decks that you feel like you love? If you could play one deck for the rest of your life, everybody's like, oh, you only get one and that's it. What would that deck be? I'm assuming, Ryan, yours would be Godo.
It would be Godo. Yep.
Fair assessment. Mm-hmm. I think mine currently I'd probably go to Roxai. I think Roxai or Kess, that Grixis shell, I think I can't really get tired of it. There's so many ways you can get to, it's the same 2 lines, but there's so many ways you can get to the lines. It never gets tiring for me, for sure. But yeah, that has been our discussion. Thank you guys so much. Make sure to give us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast aggregator. You'd be surprised at how much it helps. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and more. All of the links are in the episode notes or the link below. And yeah, that wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. Tune in next time when we talk more about our favorite format and our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we will see you next time.